Good evening, everyone, and good morning, Casey. Welcome to the Assam Frontier Academy Global Lecture Series. So my name is Daniel Ryu from the Asannanom Foundation, and I'll be the moderator of this lecture series. First, I would like to thank Casey for accepting our invitation to speak, despite the early time in the States right now. I think it's like 5:30 a.m. So Casey and I met at the 2024 AVPN Global Conference in Abu Dhabi, and while chatting with her, I was intrigued by her passion for fostering tech-based innovators. And since a considerable portion of Korean CSOs and NGOs are having difficulties implementing and using technology, we thought it would be interesting to see in which way how MIT fosters tech-based innovation. Through this lecture, we are hoping that the audience can get a glimpse of the factors to consider when implementing tech to social innovation. Before we start our lecture, I would like to introduce our speaker. So Casey is the principal of Solve Innovation Future at MIT Solve. Casey invests in technology-based solutions to address social issues. She holds a bachelor's degree from Yale and an MBA from Harvard, and she has extensive experience in consulting and the nonprofit sector. MIT Solve selects innovative solver teams each year, providing funding, coaching, and support to develop their solutions. Casey will share her insights on the role of technology in social innovation and provide examples from MIT Solve. Please join me welcoming Casey with a round of applause. So I think we can all use our hands up function to show our excitement. That would be really nice. Oh, thank you, everyone. 4 or 5 hands going up right now. So we just ended sharing our slides. So I think Casey, you can share your slides right now.
Great.
That's okay.
Oh no, that's the solve link. Sorry.
No
Try
worries.
again.
Okay.
Sorry. The thing that link was. Do you want me to do it through sharing my screen?
Yes.
I'm not sure. Oh, share. There we go.
Okay.
Just have to be a little bit smarter than your computer. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen right now. It's
Perfect.
Perfectly. Yeah.
I'm going to try to go into presentation mode.
Okay.
And let's get started. So thank you so much for having me today. And I am excited to learn from you all with respect to trends in your market, as well as really try to get into some of the questions, certainly that were submitted in advance of the conversation. But if we have time, and or if this conversation, which I very much hope this is a conversation, brings up any new questions, let's talk about them. Because I think a big part of the work at Solve is about open sourced innovation, discussion about tech, and collaborative problem solving to drive resources towards the world's most pressing problems. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And please do submit questions, use the chat, and we will try to make this a conversation rather than simply just a presentation. In terms of outline of what we'll be covering today, I'll share a little bit more about Solve and Solve Innovation Future. We'll talk a little bit about our selection process because Solve is fundamentally focused on finding innovators who are leveraging tech. And so the selection process may give you a sense of things to consider as you look at your own work with either a for-profit or a nonprofit corporate structure, and some frameworks about how we might measure whether or not the tech is driving impact. We'll quickly cover what I'm calling the case for technology. There's been a bunch of research done really all over the world, but Salesforce and Salesforce Impact Ventures has actually led the work, talking about nonprofits and social enterprise and how and why they're using technology and where those organizations may lean into technology moving forward. We'll quickly cover a few case studies, largely from the Solve community, where we can discuss the pros and cons, and some of the challenges or opportunities that there may be. And we'll leave time for a discussion on financing considerations and how these organizations are thinking about raising capital moving forward, and some of the differences between for-profit and nonprofit fundraising, and some of the similarities, particularly within the impact investing world. So let's jump in. What is Solve? Solve is a marketplace for social impact and innovation with a mission to drive innovation to solve the world's challenges. An initiative of MIT, we launch open innovation challenges to find tech-based social entrepreneurs around the world. I will pause and say as a caveat, we work with both for-profits and nonprofits, so I will somewhat loosely use the term social entrepreneur or innovator. You can imagine that that includes both for-profit structures and nonprofit structures, unless I indicate otherwise. Solve then brings together MIT's innovation ecosystem and a community of members to fund and support these entrepreneurs to help them drive lasting impact. Functionally, what that means is that we are trying to flip the traditional university model on its head and find innovators who haven't necessarily had access to a first-year classroom at MIT, bring them to the MIT innovation ecosystem, and ideally link them with 3 types of partnerships. Corporate and strategic partnerships that can help them scale either through infrastructure support or in-kind support, or through direct collaboration. Academic and research support coming from the MIT network specifically, and then funding and financing. I come in on the back end with the funding and financing piece, and I make direct investments in a subset of the for-profit innovators. We work in 4 sectors with an Indigenous Communities Fellowship that complements some of our work in the US and actually North America broadly. We also work in Canada, thinking about how do we find approximate innovators who, again, haven't necessarily had access to existing entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how do we develop the entrepreneurial ecosystems in our backyard. The 4 sectors in which we work are learning, health, climate, and economic prosperity. And each year we run a global challenge against each sector. We usually have some sort of sub-criteria that allows us to focus in on specific technologies within a given pillar. So for example, in a health pillar, we might be looking for solutions for the care economy to help connect caregivers with either workforce development training or families to support that work, to support folks who are in need of additional care. Or within a climate pillar, we might be looking for food solutions one year, housing solutions another year, et cetera. This allows us to be both targeted in terms of putting together a peer group that can learn from each other and may be able to work together, and also a broader network that can be connected every year to potential opportunities. Our Indigenous work, and we actually have a Black and Brown Innovators program, is focused primarily on finding solutions and connecting these innovators with systems that maybe are outside of their traditional entrepreneurial efforts. We deliver transformational change to our partnerships to our solver teams through community connections, funding, mentorship, exposure, and MIT affiliation and access. To date, we've received just about 10,000 solutions submitted from 165 countries. We've selected 270 solver teams through 40 global challenges. Our solver teams are headquartered in 56 countries. 60% of them are for-profit, 40% are nonprofit, and we're 62% women-led. We've catalyzed about $65 million in commitments across the Solve community and more than 700 partnerships. And I think when you think about our work in particular, we are really focused on the accountability to supporting teams in accessing these partnerships that will help accelerate growth. What that means in practice is that rather than supplying these teams with a curriculum that says, this is how you go to market, we say, you tell us what you need and we'll go find it. We will work our network to bring that to you. That brings me to my work in particular, the Solve Innovation Future Fund. The Solve Innovation Future Fund is a philanthropic venture vehicle. It was launched in 2019, and we've been actively investing since 2020. We've made 18 investments across 4 sectors into teams headquartered in 10 countries, and we use an innovative evergreen structure that allows us to recycle proceeds to reinvest in future solver teams. To date, Solve Innovation Future has unlocked $4 towards every investee for every $1 invested. And I'll highlight that point because it resonates with our broader strategy of leveraging our network and pushing, hopefully pushing teams towards transformational impact. For it is important to me when we invest in a team, not just that we are able to immediately deliver dollars, but it is more important to me that we partner for future success. So are these teams persisting, growing, and accessing additional capital? One thing that we can do, given the source of our capital, which we'll get into on the next slide, is we can be making introductions to our network to help these teams raise more money. So I'm actually accountable towards this catalytic number. We're trying to accomplish 3 things with Solve Innovation Future. The first is make catalytic investments. We heard from our teams in early days as we were selecting them in the global challenges that grant capital or prize funding that is non-dilutive is necessary but not sufficient, particularly for our for-profit teams, but also for our nonprofit teams that are looking to scale. They need access to more sustainable revenue sources. So we did the legwork and the research to develop a structure that would allow us to take risk on the biggest number of solver teams. Solver teams, and this may be, you may hear some of yourself in this description, but solver teams have impact at the core of what they do. That means that we believe they have a sustainable revenue model, or they have the path to a sustainable revenue model, but it may take them slightly longer to get there. And that could be for a number of reasons. They could be serving an undeveloped market or a new market that is not necessarily professionalized. They may be using a workforce or developing a workforce who hasn't necessarily, that may take longer to hire and train, or they may be leveraging new technology in such a way that they are serving the hardest to serve population. As a result, their revenue targets may be slightly lower than more traditional venture capital would require, or even that more traditional foundations may be asking for. Often foundations are asking for reporting with respect to impact that many of our entities are not ready to actually be able to provide. As a result, we landed on what we call a donor advised fund strategy, which in the US is essentially an alternative to a private foundation. So we can take philanthropic capital from donors and deposit it in this donor advised fund. Because the source of capital is philanthropic, we can take the risk of making founder-friendly debt, equity, and alternative investments in remarkable solver teams. These teams are typically seed and Series A. That looks different globally. A seed investment in the US may look slightly different than a seed investment in Asia, and similarly, and mostly in terms of size, I guess is my shorthand there. And similarly, if we were to work with nonprofits, investing in a nonprofit in the US versus globally might look slightly different from a tax perspective. The second piece, and catalytic is really important there because we are trying to truly unlock dollars and help build a pipeline of sustainable social enterprise. The second piece of the work is as a diversified portfolio. We needed a vehicle that would allow us to invest across all 4 sectors in which we work, as well as our Indigenous Fellows program. And we wanted truly to find as many first-time and proximate innovators as possible. So our portfolio, as I say, is more than 50% female-led. Finally, recyclable financing. All of the returns from our investments go back into the fund and back into future solver teams. This pay-it-forward model demonstrates renewable philanthropic opportunity and helps us to align incentives with our investees. We are thrilled that we recycled capital within 12 months of our launch, and we will continue to reinvest that capital. We've seen huge success with some of our revenue share agreements, which we will get into later in the conversation. And I think we look forward to continuing to work with our investees to say, you tell us what your business model is, and we will structure a deal that works for you. The structure specifically, if it's useful to see a graphic, effectively, as I've described, a donor makes a charitable donation to the fund. The fund makes an investment in an early stage startup. The investments are recycled back through the fund, and the Solve donor gets a one-time charitable deduction. So let's get into the technology piece part of the conversation. Let's make the case for technology. I think you're here because you recognize the value of working in a mission or launching a mission-driven organization. I think this is a unique moment with respect to technology. There are both philanthropic and technological trends that are emphasizing the need for technology and technology now. The first, with respect to philanthropic trends, we see 75% of nonprofit organizations that have experienced an increase in demand for their program. That's pretty remarkable, and I think picking up tailwinds from likely the COVID-19 pandemic and persistent unrest globally, that puts unbelievable pressure on organizations to continue to deliver services. And yet, at the same time, 68% are facing a reduction in funding. So how do you grow your program while you have less money, right? How do we solve this scarcity challenge? Technologically, we have 64% of businesses that are optimistic that AI will enhance overall productivity. 35% of companies are using AI tools already. That's I think actually a pretty large number, given that we've really just scratched the surface in terms of what this technology can do. And a quarter of nonprofits are using these technologies. And yet, only between 0.2 and 2% of a given economy, maybe a given tech for good economy, may be leveraging technology. So we've got this real conundrum. We need to deliver more services. We don't have enough cash to do so. We're optimistic that technology can help, but we're not quite sure where it fits in. So who are these folks that are using technology? And what does adoption and success look like? This is some of the research that Salesforce has done a few years ago. They continue every year to put out additional research on the same. Back in 2020, it was very obvious that CRM services, and obviously that serves Salesforce, but CRM services were the fundamental way that nonprofits were using technology. The second way was, and they sort of go hand in glove, but the second way was with respect to marketing for digital outreach. I think that's a pretty logical, given how individuals typically use technology, that organizations would follow in the same path, right? So as we, as individuals, use social media, use email, are doing outreach, organizations logically saw that CRM, managing databases, and reaching out to, thank you for that addition, but reaching out to individuals was likely the first and best way, the lowest hanging fruit, you might say, with respect to using technology. How is tech currently deployed? Well, as we've moved from 2020 to 2022, we've seen that teams are actually starting to look at cybersecurity and data privacy. Again, really an infrastructure play with respect to technology, certainly important for helping lubricate the infrastructure of an organization, especially with respect to fundraising and data privacy and managing these databases that were built in the early 2020s with respect to consumer outreach. And that is followed by new programs and services that about a third of teams are looking to bring online. I do think it's interesting that there certainly is an effort to be raising money online. About 26% of teams are trying to raise money online, all the way down to what was my hypothesis, that expanding the use of automation, including AI and analytics, would be top of the list, but really only 16% of the teams are thinking about that. How do we square that, where the attention is in terms of data security, privacy, new programs and services, and what the technologies actually are and how the technologies can feed those solutions in a different way. Maybe we should be thinking about flipping this on its head. And I think we can really get into that by understanding the role of technology in digitally mature nonprofits. So those that are using technology really efficiently, see the value in that, right? So 93% of digitally mature, which means teams that are actually incorporating technology in both the infrastructure or the back office work, as well as the sort of programmatic work and the marketing work, see the value in this. The two sort of, I think the key metrics there would be everyone can access the key metrics themselves, so they know what success looks like, and often that comes through some sort of technological platform, and again, that would be on the infrastructure side, and also that they are seeing value in program delivery, and that could be through fundraising or through direct service through technology. So we'll pause there on these slides if anyone has any questions there. What are some barriers? Why aren't teams investing in infrastructure, outreach, or programming? It may be because technology helps connect nonprofits and their constituents, but that they also, and this is, again, this is specific to nonprofits, but we can extrapolate to social enterprise more broadly, that nonprofits have not been able to build the IT nodes or teams that have been able to do the infrastructure work. I think one of the statistics on this slide that are interesting is that 93% of nonprofits stated that a lack of IT staff was a challenge to the organization's adoption of technologies. And I think that you can carry that over and extrapolate that is also the case for both programmatic work and outreach that leverages technology. If you don't have expertise on staff, it can be really challenging to bring technologies on board and incorporate them or inculcate them in the day-to-day work. Specifically, I think we also want to talk about the use of data and reporting data. So you can see on this slide that 75% of respondents say that measuring and reporting data is a challenge. So 3/4 of nonprofit folks believe that managing data is really challenging. So even those teams that are using technology have all this data that they don't know what to do with. And that's another type of IT or tech expertise on staff that requires building essentially an ops team or a data management team. So we really, again, we have some tension between a desire to leverage technology internally and for programmatics and for outreach, but we don't have the IT support internally for the infrastructure work, and we don't have the data management piece for the programmatics and the outreach. So where's their opportunity? Again, I think that a lot of this work, and I'll start on the right side of this slide, will come from the demand of teams themselves. And again, maybe you see yourself in this slide specifically, that fundraising teams may say, we need the data management to be able to do the outreach and to be able to expand our reach. Program teams may say, I can't deliver the services that I need in the current way. The CEO or president or an executive director of an organization may say, I need my team to be able to work more efficiently and be able to collaborate. And of course, the IT department is going to say, we need to continue to upgrade our systems. On the left side of the slide, what will these teams be asking for in particular? Again, within these 3 pillars of sort of infrastructure, program, and outreach. Right now, as we had discussed on a previous slide, almost 80% of teams are using the CRM platforms. That's where we started. Interestingly, there's also been at the bottom of the slide a significant thrust in trying to have the system to manage the programs and the service, the sort of data management piece or the outreach to constituents, et cetera. What I found notable was that within the next year, there's basically an intent across the board to use lots of different strategies. whether that be mobile apps for constituents to plug right into programming, artificial intelligence to facilitate and streamline selection processes, analytics to be able to look at data and identify takeaways, or even technology upgrades to really manage the infrastructure for data security, et cetera. So I think the risk for the market is if we continue to throw spaghetti at the wall, to use a colloquialism, and try to do everything, we may not do anything well. However, we've highlighted the need to leverage technology across every aspect of the work of a nonprofit or a social enterprise. I do think it's also interesting to note the urgency with which teams look to invest in, for example, marketing automation, that within the priorities of number of teams who are investing now versus within 2 years is useful to show how urgently teams need the technological support. And also from a more robust perspective, that nearly 50% of teams, right, are expecting to lean into these technologies over time. So how do we at Solve think about these technologies? And how do we think about, from an investment perspective or a selection perspective, how do we think about where technology comes into play? For us, we may be looking at the specific technologies that we looked at on the previous slide, marketing, cybersecurity, outreach, et cetera. But when we're actually looking at the core work and the program work, we're looking to understand how technology differentiates a team. So is the space in which a team working crowded? And if it's crowded, or there are players with similar products and solutions, how is technology differentiating these individuals? And if technology does differentiate, either through direct programmatics or through back office infrastructure, does the company or the nonprofit have IP that's leading technology, team, network, et cetera, to make the company defensible and differentiated? That plays out in our solver selection in 2 ways. The first is understanding the feasibility. So again, this is the programmatic work. This is the work of, is technology actually solving the problem? And we'll get into some frameworks and some solutions, some case studies to understand a little bit more specifically what I'm describing. But the first is, every solution must include technology, new or existing, high tech or low tech, software or hardware, all fair game. But the question for us is, if you removed the tech component of the solution, would the solution still work? And I think that quite obviously requires not just the programmatic work, but also sort of the outreach and the infrastructure work part and parcel with that. Innovation, on the innovation side of the selection process, teams are more likely to be selected if the solution leverages a new technology and a new application of an existing technology or business model or process. So the question to ask yourself as the founder is, does the solution involve novel, context-specific modifications and methods? Can you convincingly explain that the solution could change the market or enable broader positive impacts from others in the space? So I think taken together, we really at Solve are wanting to understand how technology is facilitating impact, how it's differentiating a solution from even another high-tech solution, but what does that technology actually look like? And are you using context-specific methods and modifications? And does that parlay into what we were discussing on the previous slides, this sort of infrastructure and outreach work? And are you using technology across the board to effectively and efficiently deliver services? One framework that was published in Stanford Social Innovation Review and was put together by some folks working out of Italy was that we should be thinking about technology and applications across 5 different pillars. The first are there just new solutions that we can explore coming out of technology, right? So are there new ways to think about solving old problems using technology? That may be, for example, new hardware solutions that allow for medical diagnostics in hard to serve areas. It's a good example. The second way that we might use technology in a differentiating way is for scale. One classic example is typically M-Pesa banking services. Or you could think about, we'll explore a case study on drone delivery that allows for massive amounts of data to be collected through using a new technology. The third is from a sustainability perspective. So are you using technology to help make delivery of services more efficient? The fourth is on a co-creation model. And that co-creation model means maybe you're bringing new voices to the table. So Solve prides itself on an open source technological platform that includes both bringing our community together to actually be selecting teams, but it also means that we are hopefully bringing new voices to the table who may not have access to existing systems. Finally, investment potential. And can technology help facilitate or ameliorate your pain points from a business model perspective in such a way that a team becomes more investable over time because they can serve more individuals or because their costs are driven down using technology? So I liked this framework because I think it brings together what we've discussed on previous slides with respect to technology as a solution, but also driving internal work and outreach as well. And I think we would want to focus specifically on not just, are you using technology for one of these pillars, but rather, does your technology support maybe even all 5 of these objectives? Let's get into some case studies and we can walk through how those case studies may or may not address these 5 components of the framework. The first that I'll bring up is an investee of Solve Innovation Future, a team called Pendulum AI. Pendulum is the world's first AI-powered supply chain API that predicts demand, optimizes supply, and geolocates continuously, improving on its own. I think what's interesting here, and I'll zoom back and I can talk through the framework as we discuss Pendulum rather than necessarily looking at words. Pendulum is a team that started in healthcare supply chain optimization. The team was hyper-focused on serving under-resourced and communities and working in countries where the data infrastructure was actually less robust. So I would argue that Pendulum not only was presenting a new solution, but also offering a new opportunity for scale because of the way that AI and predictive analytics work. If you are able to make strong predictions with limited information, the more information you can feed into the algorithm, the more precise that algorithm becomes, and the more useful it becomes and differentiated it becomes in even more developed markets. That is a technology that's addressing using a new solution to scale. It's also driving towards both sustainability and investment potential because there are applications beyond the immediate, not just saying, okay, in an environment where there are refugee camps, can we predict which camps will need which healthcare materials or nurses, which is something that they were able to do. But also they were able to plug into another investee, essentially a healthcare scheduling solution in Latin America, and predict which patients were less likely to show up for their appointment. So from a sustainability perspective, their solution, their algorithm was able to improve the application of services for another social enterprise. So from a sustainability perspective, we're actually making this model more sustainable. And on an investment potential perspective, they've opened up new markets and they are driving towards more sustainable service delivery. The question for this team is, how do they remain impact focused? And there will be a pressure on this team. Oop, did the slides drop? Or can you all see the slides?
Yes, it's good right now.
Okay, great. Okay,
Yep.
great. So I think the pressure on this company is whether or not they can remain tech focused, because there will be interest in this solution beyond healthcare services delivery, et cetera. And the way that we managed that, or the team managed that, was to put together a capital stack or a group of investors that is focused on technology. Or excuse me, focused on impact. And therefore, the board can help the team select projects that are focused on impact as they grow. Another study is Globee, and this is a more traditional, as I mentioned them on a previous slide, this is a more traditional hardware play. So Globee is the world's largest drone data marketplace. Functionally, they are trying to deliver hyper-local services, hyper-local visual spatial data to clients. They've worked with everyone from the World Bank to UNICEF to be able to assess specifically where there is need for lots of different interventions. One perfect example would be the disease transmission piece identified on this slide. The hyperlocal geospatial data allows World Health Organizations to prevent malaria by finding malaria mosquito breeding sites before they become transmitting mosquitoes, and warn for drought before it becomes a wildfire, or finds cracks in a bridge before it collapses. Similarly, they can actually reduce carbon emissions by working with individuals to identify where they've worked with essentially utilities and individuals to identify where there are unnecessary towers within the electrical grid. And so they're able to fix those and continue to make the grid hyper efficient. So I think what's unique about this technology is that they are connecting this really important, somewhat challenging to aggregate data using drones, and using a marketplace that looks like, we always love the analogy, the Uber of a new space, connecting the drone operators to the clients who are looking for the data. I think the consideration for this team is that platform truly unique? The application of using these drones as hardware and connecting them with the teams that need the data is definitely unique. But one thing that team has had to focus on is, how do you make that platform defensible? And so it is something to consider in your own world as you build an organization, is if you are just using technology in a new way, what is your competitive edge? In this scenario, it was first mover advantage and the ability to work with corporate clients who haven't necessarily explored this data in the past. So whether your defensibility comes from an impact aligned investor stack like Pendulum, or it comes from a first mover advantage that's impact focused. Those are different ways that you can ensure your sustainability by using technology. Finally, we'll talk about Synefa. And Synefa is implementing AI and using the Internet of Things in greenhouses to make it easier for farmers to monitor and manage their crops, especially given climate challenges such as drought and increased temperatures. Specifically, the team is trying to increase productivity by helping small farmer owners optimize growing conditions in the greenhouses. They're trying to support adaptation to climate change by providing real-time information on farm conditions and actionable recommendations on climate smart practices through the platform. They're improving access to knowledge and resources by providing smallholder farmers with comprehensive farm management tools, including crop traceability. And they're trying to reduce water use in a water-constrained environment using solar-powered IoT sensor devices that automates irrigation and optimizes water use, both driving increased crop yield and reducing water utilization by 50%. So again, this is really an interesting technology because it's leveraging software in new ways, opening up new markets, and fundamentally leverages technology internally for this infrastructure work, because these teams can't deliver the AI and IoT greenhouses without a fully integrated software solution internally, or CRM management system, data security, et cetera. So this is a team that's really brought technology across the board to the three kind of components that we had discussed: infrastructure, program, and outreach. They've also thought about using a new solution, which is the Internet of Things, to bring that to greenhouses. There's a sustainability component because of this integration, that the business model is relatively cost effective. And there's huge investment potential, both from the ability to use and deploy these greenhouses, but also the increased crop yield as a result, particularly in the face of climate stressors. The question for this team becomes scale. And how do you essentially build the people force to be able to deploy and build new greenhouses and then maintain those greenhouses over time? So I think these case studies are useful in thinking through not only where is technology used, but what are the challenges that are presented by different technologies, and what considerations should we keep at the back of our brain as we build a new business. Finally, we'll get a little bit into some of the funding considerations. And again, I know not everyone on this call is necessarily focused on for-profit or nonprofit, but I think this capital continuum that was initially published by the Omidyar Network is useful in thinking about where you might land on a capital continuum. If we start at the left side of the slide, you'll see that we've highlighted grants. Grants have traditionally been used for nonprofit organizations. They are non-dilutive, which means there's no ownership stake taken, and there's no return expectation. The idea is that they cover some portion of the cost of an organization, and that they are directly linked to impact. So every dollar spent, there will be an increased impact. As we move to the right of this capital continuum, we get into commercial capital. That's traditional capital markets that are very comfortable funding for-profit businesses. There's an expected financial return and less of a focus on direct impact, either to systems or to beneficiaries. Usually, there are two types of commercial capital available for market validated ideas. So these are companies that are profitable. We know there's a product market fit, et cetera, if they're not profitable. And then there's sort of non-market validated capital. That's really in the venture space, where we're thinking about how do we build these companies? How do we finance these companies that are still proving that there's a path to sustainability? Right in the middle, and typically serving both for-profits and nonprofit, is some of the sub-commercial capital. That often comes from different sources, and on the next slide, we'll talk about some of the different ways that those dollars are deployed. But the sub-commercial capital is really looking for either capital preservation, which means they just want to get their investment back, or positive returns, but that are sub-market, in that more traditional venture capital might be looking for a 10x return. Impact venture capital may be comfortable with a 4x return because of some of the impact considerations we've discussed in the lecture. At Solve, we think about three different types of investments beyond traditional grants. We think about safes or convertible notes, which are relatively simple to execute and allow an investor to take some equity position in a company. We think about revenue share agreements for companies that have a logical business model, but that business model may be focused primarily, or may require an upfront investment with revenues that are less predictable and maybe can't pay down debt. And so the repayment fluctuates with or a more cyclical revenue. So often for some of our ed tech founders, for example, they see sales increase at certain times of year and they're flat at other times of year, given when schools have budget allocation. And so a revenue share agreement allows them to effectively pay down the investment when they have cash flow. And the third is priced equity, which is more traditional impact venture, and the idea that you would take equity in a company and there would be some exit in the future. And we will zoom through these. Functionally, there is a much bigger world of potential investment structures that could work with both for-profits and nonprofits, depending on the actual sort of where you land in corporate structure. On the right side is the sort of most traditional investment, or sort of most market rate aligned investment. On the left side, you could imagine there would be grants, as well as PRIs, which in the US is a program related investment. It is funding coming from a foundation that expects return, but has a social impact. We talked a little bit about the revenue share agreements on the previous slide, as well as convertible debt. I think the debt structures are underutilized, but can help particularly teams that are for profit and have a very obvious business model grow without having to sell equity in their company. Safes have become ubiquitous in the United States with respect to helping teams that would like to exit eventually grow. And then priced equity, once teams are big enough that they are generating revenue and they'd like to have a price round with a valuation. So I share this less to get into the specifics of any of the one structure, but rather to say there are options available to you as you launch your nonprofit or social enterprise, particularly if you're using technology to sustainably scale. So I will pause there. I think we've taken up just about the 50 minutes that we have. And we have a discussion section of the conversation.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you for the presentation and for sharing your experience on investment and also how technology can foster social innovation. So now we'll go on to the discussion segment of our session. This is an opportunity for all of you to actually engage directly with Casey and ask questions and dive deeper into the lecture. But before we start, Casey, we actually support simultaneous translations between Korean and English. So, and usually the participant will ask in Korean. So can you find the button right now? So there's a translation button, and if you click it, you can choose it in English.
Okay. The translation on the chat specifically.
Yes. Not the chat, but so you can see the globe. Well, globe and underbar translations. Can you see it?
Yes, I found it. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. So just set your language in English and
perfect.
Okay, people will talk in Korean. So actually, as this is a session for the 13 Asan Frontier Academy participants, we will focus more on the previously submitted questions for the debate or the conversation. But we're always open to Q&As. So if you can, upload your inquiries or any questions via Q&A, we'll try to get back to you after the lecture. So let's start engaging in the discussion. So I went through the pre-submitted question, and I thought that Haejung's 3 questions regarding connecting and motivating mentors, which is closer to the operation side, would be an interesting topic to start. So Haejung, if you're there, can you turn on your mic and screen and ask your question? Okay. I think if I think if Hejung is preparing, I think Yeonjae's question is also pretty interesting. So Yeonjae, are you there?
네, 제
Oh,
목소리
yes.
잘 들리고 있나요?
Yes, yes. Can you turn on your video too, please?
Yep, I can hear your voice clearly.
네. 안녕하세요. 저는 아산 프론티어 아카데미 13기 무궁무진 스튜디오 정연재입니다. 저는 아티스트의 지속 가능한 창작 활동을 위한 자원과 기금을 연결하는 교육과 서비스를 운영하고 있는데요. 기존 활동의 프로세스 디자인과 기술이 확보되면 더 큰 영향력을 만들어 갈 수 있다는 믿음으로 이야기 가진 사람과 재능을 가진 아티스트를 연결하고 창작 자금을 매칭하는 플랫폼을 개발하고 있습니다. 이번에 2023년 애뉴얼 리포트에서 그걸 미리 읽고 왔는데 인상 깊었던 점이 한 방향으로 흘러가는 기부금의 흐름을 임팩트 투자 관점으로 기부 혁신 활동 그리고 투자 수익 확보 재투자의 선순환을 만들어 나가는 프로세스라는 점에서 흥미로웠는데요. 기부자의 입장에서는 내가 투자한 1달러가 1달러 그대로 전달하고 소진되는 게 아니라 4달러의 가치 정도로 4배, 평균 4배로 성장한다라는 지점이 뭔가 사회혁신에 이바지한다는 사실이 실제로 기부하는 기부자로서는 효능감을 느끼게 할 것 같습니다. 이 사실은 분명 기부자에게 사회적 인센티브를 부여하는 행위에 해당하는 것 같은데요. 그래서 첫 번째 질문으로 기부자는 자신의 기부금이 혁신에 재투자되어서 수익이 발생하는 경우 기부자 본인도 인센티브를 받는 구조인지 그 부분도 좀 궁금하고요. 그리고 두 번째로는 후원자인 기업 또는 기관이나 개인 기부자가 후원의 대상인 실행자의 비즈니스나 활동을 모니터링하고 사회적 가치를 측정하는 시스템이 어떻게 운영되는지 그런 부분이 궁금합니다. 그리고 추가적으로는요.
Terrific.
네네. 먼저 답변을 듣고, 네, 추가 질문을 말씀드리고 싶습니다.
Great.
Great. Let's start with your first two questions, and thank you for both explaining what you're working on, as well as the thoughtful response to some of the materials discussed. The first question with respect to economic incentives is a really fascinating question for impact investors. I think what we have found is that in the first part of the work, in the actual donation, the economic incentive for the donors or the funders in the US is essentially effective tax benefit. So a donor gives to Solve Innovation Future and they receive a tax write-off. It's tax deductible. So there is an obvious economic incentive to engage. With the reinvestment, there is no incentive because no tax incentive because it is a one-time tax deduction. However, what we have found is that the funders who are most interested in the work typically are those who either are investors or believe that technology and social enterprise are the building blocks for community development. So it's more of an understanding of the way the economics work and feeling like the philanthropic capital is being used efficiently. So there certainly is an economic incentive up front. On the back end, it's more of a philosophical perspective on efficient use of capital in philanthropic markets, is what I would say. On the second piece, how is the system set up to monitor the impact and the sort of output, I'll use my word, of the teams that are supported? We ask for a fair amount of impact reporting, which may or may not be relevant in the arts in particular. However, we look for quarterly reporting on self-reported impact metrics as well as impact metrics that roll up to our sector level UN SDG goals. So we are on a regular basis getting information from our investees that we can report out to our donors or our investors. The second piece is sort of more qualitative in that it is sort of what I'll call ourselves an intermediary, right? Because we are bundling the dollars and making the investments and then sharing that back. It is the fund's obligation to be continuing to share information on a regular basis. So we communicate monthly with our donors and our investors, and we share qualitative news. So we say, so-and-so was selected as one of the Time 100 social enterprises globally, or XYZ entity launched a new program. And when donors are really interested in a specific entity, we connect them directly. So they're getting that information. So it's both a passive and a proactive effort. And then the third piece is that we meet twice a year at Solve. We have 2 events, a pitch day and what we call our capstone event or our flagship event in Cambridge. And those are opportunities for the social enterprise themselves, the teams themselves, to be sharing out their progress. And maybe they bring a beneficiary to the work, or maybe they just share what they're doing verbally. But it is an opportunity to bring the 2 sides of this equation together to be able to share what their impact looks like.
Okay, sounds great. I think we can go to our next question with Haejung, because she actually submitted a question regarding the operational side and about how you motivate technological experts. So Haejung, could you turn on your mic, please?
네, 안녕하세요. 잘 들리실까요? 네, 그러면 질문을 하도록
I
하겠습니다.
can.
네, 우선 너무 강연 재미있게 잘 들었고요. 저는 모두연구소에서 커뮤니티 리드를 하고 있는 장혜정이라고 합니다. 제가 속해 있는 모두연구소는 현재 테크포 임팩트라는 프로젝트를 통해서 사회 문제 해결에 동참할 개발자들을 모집해서 테크포 임팩트 기술 커뮤니티를 구성하고 이를 통해 각종 사회 문제를 기술로 풀어나갈 수 있도록 적극 지원을 하고 있거든요. 그래서 MIT 솔브에 지향하는 내용이 저희 사회적 임팩트를 기술을 통해서 만들려는 저희 회사의 지향점과 유사한 점이 많아서 무척 흥미로웠던 것 같습니다. 특히 저는 커뮤니티 담당으로서 다양한 글로벌 서포터 커뮤니티를 통해서 연결을 시도하는 점이 인상적이었는데요. 제가 3가지 질문을 준비했습니다. 우선 첫 번째는 멘토링과 같이 이게 내적 동기 중심으로 지원 참여를 할 때 뭔가 저희가 돈을 주거나 이런 게 아닌 차원이니까 어떻게 이제 내적 동기 중심으로 지원 참여를 성공적으로 하기 위해서 어떤 노력을 하셨을까라는 점이 좀 궁금했고요. 그다음 2번째 질문은 커뮤니티가 굉장히 방대해 보였었는데 이렇게 풀이 많으면 많을수록 적절한 연결이 쉽지 않을 것 같다는 생각이 좀 들었습니다. 그래서 지원자와 혁신가의 연결을 어떤 식으로 효율적이고 효과적으로 진행하고 있는지가 궁금했고요. 또 마지막 질문은 임팩트 지향의 비영리 조직의 경우에는 기술적 인프라라든지 역량이 부족한 경우가 굉장히 많은 것을 제가 현장에서 확인했습니다. 그래서 이를 기술적으로 잘 해결하기 위해서는 비영리 조직의 기술에 대한 이해를 높이는 것도 굉장히 중요하다고 제가 느꼈는데요. 기술로 연결할 수 있는 문제 정의를 잘하기 위해서 내부적으로 갖고 계신 방법론이나 노하우가 궁금합니다.
Great. Thank you so much for these thoughtful questions. And it is heartening to know that there is a network of teams working to drive towards the same goals. So I'm excited and happy to dig into this with you. The first question on mentorship in particular is one that I think is both art and science. The fundamental concern at Solve is always that we are functionally only as strong as our network. It's why I was excited to meet Daniel at AVPN. and why we work hard to leverage the MIT community to be able to have a bench, use a colloquialism, but to have a group of individuals that are interested in supporting solver teams as mentors. If you do not have the large pool, it is unlikely that you will be able to match both sector and skill expertise with a given founder. So that's part one, is just building the bench. The second part is the matching piece. And this is actually, I think, more of the art than the science of finding individuals who have skills-based expertise and sector-based expertise. We have found that the mentorship match is highly reliant on personality, which makes good sense when you are having this conversation on a webinar. But we would have hoped, right? We would have hoped that we could have made it more efficient by using technology, et cetera. But functionally, there's a question of, do these folks get along? Do they like each other? And that realistically, a founder has to really want a mentor for the match to work. So I share that because certainly the legwork of building out the group of individuals who might be good mentors is really important. But I think being ruthlessly honest with yourself and with ourselves about, do entrepreneurs have time, energy, and want for a mentor before assigning those mentors is the most important part to making that program work. And so for where we've moved is, upon selection as a solver team, can we sit with or get to know the solver teams in such a way that we are not necessarily pushing a mentor on every team, but rather if there is a specific challenge where we think we have a mentor who fits, that we suggest that mentor to that team. So blanket mentorship has been something that we have moved away from. Targeted and strategic mentorship for teams that are exhibiting a need or asking for, has been more successful on our end. Your second question on connections for these teams and doing that in an efficient way, I think we are moving towards a more efficient process for making transformative or brokering transformative partnerships. Interestingly enough, and relevant to this conversation, we are using AI as a way to better both our selection process and our matching process. And that allows us to draw from our database and draw from the personal networks or professional networks of the experts on our teams to be able to drive those partnerships. Functionally, we are able to target the connections because we ask each team who comes through the Solve program to fill out a baseline assessment that's 10 pages of information on current state and needs. That allows us to bubble up from 8 categories of needs that include everything from fundraising to technological infrastructure to research support, et cetera. And we identify the top 2 needs across those categories. So we are already looking at a much smaller subset of introductions. And then we have a team that's explicitly focused on meeting those needs. So we do, in a qualitative way, we call them sprints, where we have the team sit together and the program team who has run the baseline assessment comes in and says, okay, this is what this team works on, and these are their top 2 needs. Everyone brainstorm about what is within our network and what might be outside of our network. Then they go back and they use AI to look through our database to see what additional matching can be done. And then there is really still some legwork, which I think we will get better at as we use AI, but there's still some sort of just cold, hard outreach of looking through and sending emails and following up with phone calls and inviting people to events. And functionally, once folks are at events, introducing individuals to each other. And we have had huge success at our flagship event and at our pitch day of quite literally tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, I was really looking forward to introducing you to this social innovator. And we have seen millions of dollars of partnerships transpire through those introductions. So that's sort of how I think about your first two questions. I think in terms of the technological infrastructure and understanding a methodology, I think I don't have a great answer save for the way we think about our selection. So asking teams really to have great answers to, is technology core to the work that you are doing from a product perspective? And from an infrastructure perspective, have you been specific about what your needs are? And that gets back to some of the Salesforce research in particular of, do you have great database management? Are you looking for an outbound marketing strategy? Do you have a platform that allows you to manage volunteers, right? Being really specific about what the infrastructure is. Just saying infrastructure is too broad a category. So I think it requires ruthless specificity, both about program and infrastructure and what you are trying to achieve. And I don't think it is a particularly sophisticated framework that's necessary to do that assessment. I think you could even use the slides, some of the Salesforce data to say, look at these 8 applications of technology. Where do you land? What do you need? And then being consistent and asking those questions across the social enterprises in your network. And then from an innovation perspective, as we think about tech as actually solving problems and working with constituents or beneficiaries, I do think the question on novel application is a double-edged sword. You certainly want novel application. I think what the early days of venture capital, last 50 years of venture capital have told us that novel technology is only as good as its application. And so being really clear with teams and saying, how are you better serving constituents and beneficiaries using that technology? Because just having a cool technology is not going to be sufficient to actually building a sustainable business. So I think both of those assessments is about being really clear-eyed about opportunities and challenges.
Okay, sounds great. I think we have time for one question, and actually the students in the Assam Frontier Academy batch are doing their own social innovation projects. And I thought that maybe a question about the projects and what they're doing would be a great question to kind of wrap up this discussion. So Byung-wook, are you online right now? Mr. An Byung-wook? If not, okay. So if not, I think actually Yeonjae had a question about their social innovation projects, and it's about motivating people to kind of like reinvest and and those stuff. So I guess Yeonjae can start his question about their social innovation project. That would be good. Yeonjae, you have the floor.
네, 안녕하세요. 정연재입니다. 캐시 연사님의 아까 답변 많은 도움이 됐고요. 저의 추가적인 질문은 저희가 아산 프론티어 아카데미에서 저희 팀은 모금 교육, 컨텐츠 커뮤니케이션 전문가가 모인 팀에 속해서 한국의 자전거 이용률을 높이기 위한 획기적인 인센티브 요소를 포함한 어떠한 캠페인을 만들어 나가고 있습니다. 한국은 지난 한 5, 6년간 국유 자전거랑 국유 모빌리티가 되게 많이 확산이 돼서 자전거 공급량은 많아졌지만 주행 환경, 예를 들어 자전거 도로나 법령 이런 것들의 정보가 혼재되어 있고 뒷받침되지 못하고 있어서 좀 어려움을 겪고 있습니다. 근데 한국은 반면에 대중교통이 되게 연계가 잘 되어 있어서 한편으로는 친환경 교통수단인 자전거보다 대중교통이 이용자 입장에서는 되게 효율적일 때가 많습니다. 이 부분이 좀 아이러니한데요. 그래서 기꺼이 사람들이 집에 모셔둔 자신의 자전거를 꺼내서 다시 주행을 시작할 수 있도록 뭔가 동기를 만드는 것이 저희의 캠페인의 핵심인데요. 후원자 또는 참여자에게 사회를 변화시켜 나간다는 어떠한 효능감을 어떻게 경제적 또는 사회적 인센티브로 부여할 수 있을지를 계속 고민하고 있는 단계입니다. 케이시 연사님이 말씀해 주셨던 사례를 더 유심히 보게 됐는데요. 그래서 기부 또는 나의 실천이 소비되어서 영에 수렴되는 게 아니라 시민들의 개선, 인식 개선 또는 안전을 위한 인프라, 그러니까 장치 확보에 어떤 재투자가 될 수 있다는 믿음을 캠페인 안에서 뭔가 설계하는 것이 중요하겠다는 인사이트를 얻을 수 있었습니다. 혹시 제가 지금 말씀드렸던 프로젝트에 대한 내용을 들어보시고 뭔가 간단하게 조언해 주실 수 있는 말씀이 있으시다면 정말 많은 도움이 될 수 있을 것 같습니다. 감사합니다.
Absolutely. And I love hearing about some of the projects that you're working on. This one, the irony is not lost. And so what an interesting challenge that you've chosen to address. I think specifically, I actually would point to some of our community work about engaging both the solver teams, but also the broader network in some of the work. And for example, to drive behavior change. And for example, we have a community award where our network votes for the solver team that they think will have the most impact. And then there is funding associated with winning that award. And I draw that example because we get, thousands, tens of thousands of votes for solver teams. And often those votes are coming from individuals who've never met any of these teams or may not be impacted by the solution, may not be served by the solution. But the gamification, for lack of a better word, and engagement of a community can help drive behavior change, can help drive folks to vote, to support, to use their network. And so I think in large part, there certainly is, as you've mentioned, there is a benefit to altruism and to sort of paying it forward. But also if you can engage the community in a way that promotes the behavior that you'd like and celebrates that behavior that you'd like, that's going to be where you will have the stickiness that you desire. So whether that means a running feed or some sort of public celebration of this many rides and this many rides from this neighborhood or these individuals, and then celebrating those small milestones as we do with our community award, that's where you'll start to get this flywheel of change in our experience. Certainly, if there was a reinvestment opportunity if there was some sort of monetary experience that would be able to be reinvested with an economic incentive upfront, as we discussed at a previous question, I think that's always it's an interesting idea. But functionally, what you're trying to do is sort of societal behavior change. And to do that, you need to both celebrate and incentivize through, I think, gamification. And the second part is then create the peer expectation that others are engaging in this bike riding in this case, but are engaging in this new behavior. If my husband rides his bike to work, I'm more likely to ride my bike to work. And so if you can do that, right, if you can make it a game, celebrate the small wins, and then create the peer-to-peer pressures, I think that's when you'll be most successful. And I think maybe that's even a nice point to end on, Daniel, I know we're wrapping up, but I think what we've learned from a technology perspective is using technology can both better serve individuals and consumers, beneficiaries. It can also make organizations run better. And when more folks are using technology, the technology gets better, it gets cheaper, and it gets easier to use. And so I think the peer-to-peer piece and the sharing and the collaborative work is really important. And that's why MIT Solve focuses on open source technology. And we are excited to and happy to collaborate with folks like you all to make sure that we're using technology in really efficient ways.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you for the discussion, the questions in the discussion, and also your response, Casey. And actually, since it's 7:50, we'll have to wrap up this session. And actually, there are a lot of pending questions right now in the chat, but we'll try to get back to them. Afterwards, I'll send an email to Casey, and we'll try to get an answer for everyone, and that will help us to find ways to leverage technology to enhance social innovation. So I think this session's topic and also the lecture and the discussion all goes in one, sharp like needle, which is leveraging technology to kind of like foster social innovation. So I hope that afterwards we can see in which way to enhance social innovation. And thank you very much, Casey, for joining our lecture and also the discussion. And thank you, everyone, also.